Next step on our guided tour of the French classics is the cabbage patch. We're doing chou farci, to stuff a cabbage, today on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. You know, along with other French classics like riz à l'impératrice, or the Empress's rice, and canard à la rouennaise, which is pressed duck, and rôti de bœuf à la Matignon, that means it's a fancy beef dish, is also chou farci, meaning stuffed cabbage. Chou, cabbage, farci, stuffing. And actually this is a classical dish because you find quite a number of recipes of it in escoffier. And as you can see, it just looks like a cabbage, a rather pale one, but a cabbage. And what's in it? It's cabbage leaves and just a lovely, beautiful smelling, delicious meat stuffing that's in it in layers. And then it's baked and unmolded and presented so that it looks like a cabbage. And that's what we're doing. It's a very popular dish in Europe. And I think most everyone loves it here, but not everyone sees it stuffed whole. And for it, we're going to do enough. This here will serve about 8 people, so you need a cabbage about 2.5 to 3 pounds. And if the season is right, you can get these Savoy or crinkly leaf cabbages, which are very nice. This is the only one that I found in the market today. The reason they're awfully nice is that they are green almost all the way down, and they seem to stay greener after they've been cooked. But otherwise, you just get the regular cabbage, the old hard-headed one, or Danish cabbage. And what you have to do is you have to get the leaves off of it, and then you have to soften the leaves. I had a soft leaf here somewhere. Oh, here it is. You want to soften the leaves like this so that you can stuff the cabbage, and so that you can mold the leaves with a stuffing. And so what you have to do is to get the leaves off first, and if you have the hard-headed cabbage, you take a knife and you cut out the stem end. And then what you're going to do is to blanch the cabbage, which means that you're going to drop it into a great big pot of water and boil it. And that's going to soften it enough so that the leaves will come off. I'm going to put a cover on it to make it boil a little bit faster. That's going to take about 5 minutes. So while it's boiling there, you want to do something else. And you'll sort of take your recipe and look at it and see what else there is. In this case, we have 3 things that we have to do, which is one, the stuffing that goes into the cabbage, and then we have the braising ingredients, which include aromatic vegetables, those familiar things. And then we have a sauce, a tomato sauce, which goes very nicely with it. And if you see in your recipe, you have to have, in this case, 1.5 cups of minced onions that go into the stuffing, and then you have to have some more minced onions that go into your sauce. And they both have to be cooked, so that you might as well start doing them, because you can't get to your stuffing if you don't have your minced onions. So in other words, whenever you're cooking, be sure that you have read the recipe. I know there are quite a few people who don't, and then they suddenly are ready to do something, and my gosh, they haven't got the right dish, or they haven't got enough onions, or something like that. So, onions, and those are going to be cooked, and these can be cooked in a little oil or butter. I'm going to put in about 2-3 tablespoons of oil, and I'm going to have 2 cups of onions in all. I've got some, they're all measured that. 1.5 cups are going to go into the sauce, and the rest of them are going to go into the stuffing. And now, if you look around also, you're going to have some more onions and some carrots that are going to go into the braising juices. I'm putting a cover on those onions. And so the carrot just has to be roughly sliced. That's been scrubbed and just sliced up. And I'll use some of these onions for that. That's about, for this we just need about 1 carrot and just a little handful of onions like that. And set those aside and let them cook. And then you look around, see what else you have. And you find that you have some salt pork that has to be sliced and blanched, and that's going to be for part of the braising. Now here's your salt pork. And you want to be sure, because the salt pork also gives flavor to the dish. I'm going to take this cover off so I can see that it's boiling. You want to be sure that it's a very good quality. Take a smell of it, and it shouldn't be hard and stiff. And then it always has a rind on it. Take the rind off. And then this we want sliced into slices of about 1/4 of an inch thick. And this is a nice lean salt pork of a very nice quality. You want about 12 slices of just about that size. And then the reason you want to blanch that in the same pot of boiling water is to take the saltiness out of it, because the salt is just a preservative. And you just put them in. I'm not going to do it, but after they've been blanched, there they are. They look just the same. But if you don't blanch them, they very often shrivel up, and because the salt is a preservative anyway, they don't have a particularly nice taste. So the blanching freshens them. So that's done. Set that aside. And then you have another blanching. The salt pork only needs about 3 or 4 minutes. And then another thing that needs blanching, as for the sauce, are tomatoes, because you want to have 2 cups of fresh tomato pulp, and that is tomatoes peeled, seeded, and juiced. About 3 or 4 tomatoes of this medium size. Drop them into boiling water 10 seconds, peel them, and chop them. And then you have your tomato business all done. So by always paying attention to your recipe and always doing something, you'll find that things are going to cook a lot faster. People will often say something like a recipe like stuffed cabbage, there's so much to do and it takes so long and so forth. But if you really pay attention to what you're doing, you'll find that it works very quickly. Now I'm going to take out, we'll see how this cabbage is going. Here, you see this, the leaves have begun to loosen. They're some of the outside ones. And when they've loosened, take them out of the pot. And then you keep nudging them off. And this takes, after about 5 minutes, it'll still take about 5 minutes or so more. You keep on boiling it. And if you find that they stick too much in here, you may have to enlarge this little hole here. Now you have to wait for that a little bit longer. I'm not going to do this whole thing. I'm going to take that out of the way because we don't want to sit here 10 minutes taking the cabbage apart. Well, then when you finally get down to the bottom, you come to the heart part. And this, the leaves are not useful for this to form the cabbage with, but you're going to boil it for about 5 minutes more and soften it, and then that's going to go into your stuffing. So you have your heart that boils 5 minutes more, and then you put the rest of the leaves back in again because they have to be limp. These are not limp enough if you tried to bend them around a bowl or something, they would they would crack, and you want to keep them whole, as you will see later as we go on. So again, they just boil. And again, I'm going to put that cover on. And I think this is, if you have the Savoy cabbage, that crinkly leaf cabbage, the leaves come apart very easily. And all you need to do is to take the stem out and just pull out the leaves and stick them into the water and blanch them so that it's a little bit easier. Unfortunately, they're just not always in season. Now that's doing. Look at everything here. And those onions are cooking nicely. And now, again, you have 2 or 3 minutes to wait for the leaves, and you might as well get to your stuffing. And the great thing about stuffed cabbage is you can use turkey stuffing, breadcrumbs, vegetarian stuffings, and if there's a very nice stuffing they use in Provence that has chopped chard and spinach and ham and rice in it. And stuffing is farce, as I said, F-A-R-C-E, so that's why you get farci. And this stuffing is a meat stuffing. We want about 6 cups of it, and I had some leftover braised beef, and so I've got about 4 cups of braised beef that's ground, and 1.5 cups of fresh sausage meat, and then as an extender, a cup of boiled rice, and 2 eggs. And the only proportions you really need to remember is that for 6 cups of stuffing, you need 2 eggs because the eggs hold it together. And then when you season it, you want to over-season a little bit because the seasonings disperse somewhat in the cooking. And this, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 cloves of garlic pureed into it, and about half a teaspoon of salt and several big grinds of pepper, and about 3/4 teaspoon to a teaspoon of thyme, or you could use sage, and about 1/4 teaspoon of allspice or clove. And then you want to add a little bit of bouillon. I already have a little bit, but put on a little bouillon or tomato juice or something like that to loosen it up. And then you also, of course, you have your 1.5 cups of sauteed onions in here. And then be very sure you check the seasoning. Take a little spoonful like that and saute it in a little frying pan on both sides until it's done. And then taste it very carefully and then add more seasoning if you feel it's necessary, remembering to over-season a little bit. Now, we hope that our leaves are done. And out they come. Of course, the inside leaves are quite white, while the outside ones are quite green. And the outside ones you want to try and keep as whole as possible. There's that little heart. I'm just putting them on a big tray like this, and then I'll drain the tray, then I'll drain the liquid back in again. There. Voila. Move over some of these cabbages. Goodbye. There. Now, I've got this little heart here, and that has to be chopped. And that's, you'll see, that's going to go along with the rest of the cabbage, rest of the stuffing. You'll see how that works. I'm going to put that on a little plate. Terribly neat. And now, as you see, there's you got your cabbage shape there. And you want to mold it into something that's going to give you a shape, something like a cabbage. So I'm going to put it in this bowl. There are various ways of molding it, and I just happen to prefer the bowl method because I think it's easier. Now we have our pork strips, and we put some of them in the bottom of the bowl. And these are to protect the cabbage as it cooks. And then we have our ready cooked vegetables here. And half of those are the carrot and onion that were sautéed. And they go in the bottom, and they're to give a nice flavor to the cabbage as it cooks. And then the leaves go in. And as you notice, what you're trying to do is to make a nice outside of the leaves so that the large part goes down in the bottom of the bowl and the stem end goes up and top. And it's very important that you get the outside leaves. You use the biggest and the greenest ones. And as you see, the rib end is up and the big end is down in the bottom of the bowl. Just keep thinking that what you're trying to do, you're molding it upside down, because you're going to unmold it after it's done. And now stuffing goes in a layer. And then there's some of your chopped cabbage, which goes in. And a rather pale leaf can go on top too. And how much cabbage and how many leaves go in depends very much on how much stuffing you have. And then keep putting more leaves down the side of the bowl. Just so that you're going to have a nice thing to unmold with at the end. That's a rather messy leaf. I'm going to take half of that. There isn't I think a nice thing about this kind of a dish, there isn't any rule to it. You just get the general idea and then you go on your own as to proportions and so forth. Now we have the lining on the outside of the bowl. We put on some more stuffing, and then always a little bit of the chopped cabbage heart on top, and just continue on that way. I'm going to show you one that's just about finished. There you are. You've got your bowl just about finished, so take your top leaves and fold them down over. This cabbage is much paler than the other one. And then you're going to finish off with some pork and vegetables. There's some of those little salt pork strips. And then we have the rest of these vegetables. And all of this is to give added flavor. And the pork, again, is to sort of fatten it up. It's like an automatic baster. And then you have bouillon in. And this, if you have homemade stock, that's very nice. Otherwise, just use some store-bought canned bouillon. And you never know how much this is going to hold. Sometimes if you have a bowl that's sort of straight up and down, it'll hold a little more liquid than a round bowl. But it's very important when you're baking this, as you will, is to keep looking at the liquid level and keep adding more, because it's the bowl and the liquid takes the place of cooking it in a big pot au feu. Now there's some foil. Put some foil on the top of that. And then there's a cover on. That's just an upturned pie plate. And you want to have a drip pan, because if you don't have one, you're going to find that it will mess up in your oven a bit. And you can get this all molded ahead of time and refrigerate it and then cook it the next day if you want. And now this is to go into about a 400 degree oven at first. And as soon as the liquid begins just to simmer, then turn the oven down to about 325 or 300. It should just cook very, very, very slowly. And keep watching that liquid level and adding a little more if necessary. And this 6-cup bowl will take about 2 to 2.5 hours to 165 degrees. And then while it's boiling, you want to take care of your sauce. You remember those onions that we did at the very beginning. That's about 1/2 cup or so of minced cooked onions. And there's 2 cups of fresh tomato pulp. And you want to let that cook slowly for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then when that has been cooked, you then, when the cabbage is done, you drain the cabbage juices into this. And that's going to make a very nice sauce. Now, we'll say that 2 to 2.5 hours have expired and we have the ready cabbage in a rather large drip pan. But if you don't have one, then at least I find that it frequently just spills all over the oven. Now here you are. There's your cover off and that. Also, I put some pork rind on there as well. But there you are with the bits of pork. And everything is cooked very nicely. There's still a little bit of liquid in there. And now the juices are to be drained into the tomatoes. I hope I've got the right kind of a cover now. And there's the tomatoes. There. I think that is going to work. There. No juices. Well, I think that often happens when this has been cooked a little bit ahead and it has now reabsorbed the juices. But never at a loss, we have some extra ones. Just pour them in and let that simmer while you're fixing the rest of the cabbage. Now, these little pork pieces have a very nice flavor, and I think it's a good idea to saute them, and then you can serve them either on the cabbage as a decoration or separately. So just take them off and saute them lightly in a pan. And then unmold on a warm platter. There. No. Isn't strong enough. There we are. Le chou farci. And you can leave the pork strips and the vegetables on top or not. It just depends on how you feel about it. I think I'm going to leave them on. I think they look rather nice. But you know, there are naturally different ways of doing a cabbage than this. I think the more classic way is to form it on a piece of cheesecloth and then tie it up in a ball and then drop it into a big kettle of boiling bouillon. Or, and this is rather fun, you can form it in a string bag like this. This is called sous façon. And this is a Provençal way of doing things, which is, I don't know how you get it out of the bag after it's done. Maybe you have to cut the bag apart. I don't know. But anyway, And here's, after you've finished your tomato sauce, it should look like this. You may have to add a little more tomato to it. You see, well, where I didn't really cook the tomatoes down, but after you've cooked it down, you can strain it out. And then just put the sauce all around so that you have a nice sea of red. And this will have to be, and if you have a platter that isn't big enough to put the sauce around, you could just use a sauce bowl and then take a rubber spatula and clean up any little spills. And then a bit of parsley on top, I think, would be nice. And then then the pork pieces, you just keep sauteing and then serve them in a separate pan. You probably would want about, for 8 people here, you really you'd want, I should say, about 2 or 3 cups of sauce anyway. I'm just cleaning that up so it will look nice. And then this is ready to serve. You can do it, cook it ahead and then keep it warm, but as it often happens, it does absorb the juices. There. I'm going to cut it open and serve it so you can see how it looks. What's nice about this is you have your meat and vegetable together, so you don't need to have anything else in the way of green vegetable. There's a little extra salt, and there's a nice piece of that sautéed pork, and some boiled potatoes go perfectly with it, and serve a red or a rosé wine. So actually, really, what you have here is it's another meatloaf masquerade. And rather than parading around in a fancy dish like a French terrine or costumed in dough like a pâté en croûte, this cabbage creation is just another meatloaf, but in chou clothing. Chou farci, stuffed cabbage. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.